Spanning over 623 years, the Ottoman Empire was known for numerous elements ranging from their Sultanate reigns to extraordinary ancient architecture. However, what really caught the attention of many was the concept of slavery that the Ottomans applied. Unlike other slaves known in history, the Ottoman Empire slaves were white and were subject to objectification, brutal tactics, and much worse. While the Ottoman Empire did follow Islamic beliefs, which prohibited slavery, the rulers at that time had created harsh circumstances for the slaves, circumstances that were more shocking than you think. White slavery in the Ottoman Empire. When one wants to put the topic of white slavery in the Ottoman Empire, one should know that this was completely different from the one in other empires. Unlike American slavery, this was practiced under the strict rules and regulations of Islamic law. Slaves were considered property in the Ottoman Empire, and according to the Islamic Holy Book Quran, slaves should be treated gently, with no distinction based on color or creed. The laws were recognized, and the slaves were treated much more gently than other brutal masters. Most of the time, the master would even free their slaves to acquire tranquility of the soul. However, when we see slaves, white female slaves were usually given elite tasks or positions in the house or the harem. They would serve as the waitress of their mistress or adorn their mistress. African or black slaves, on the other hand, were given inferior tasks. Hence, the white slaves were in better condition than the black ones. Despite the better living conditions, the lives of slaves were not something easy and comfortable. They were sold in the market, and some masters would turn out to be brutal and cruel. In the meantime, the Ottoman Empire, as expanded earlier, kept on expanding, even after the continued attempts to dissolve the empire by foreign invasions. Specifically, during the initial centuries of the empire, slaves were taken during invasions or politically organized missions commanded by the Sultan across southern and eastern Europe, the Balkans, and the Caucasus, with a large percentage smuggled to the capital Constantinople, nowadays known as Istanbul. From the 16th to 19th century, hundreds of thousands of Europeans were captured by cruel pirates and sold to the Ottomans as slaves. Though the Ottomans were not participants in such activities, it is estimated that during the peak, every 1 in 5 residents of Constantinople was a slave. This is the largest example of white slavery in history. But how exactly did a slave come there? The journey from human to slave. Wars were a big source of getting white slaves for the empire in Islam. People were also considered booty, and it was permissible for the conquerors to capture people from the other nation and make them slaves. White female slaves, after getting sold, could not return to the streets again. The master of white slaves mostly sold them further, kept them, or set them free. The people who bought white female slaves could do whatever they wanted to their slaves. They were also even sold by their owners, as this was a booming business in the past. As a result, people would even inspect every inch of the body of the slaves, and the slaves who dared to resist such actions would be punished. Wives were sold at a much higher rate if a slave knew how to play musical instruments, do household chores well, or speak foreign languages. Especially for the white slaves who were kept as concubines, their age, color, skin, and beauty mattered a lot. A male slave was high-priced if he knew the art of blacksmithing, animal keeping, or any other important skills. The virginity of white female slaves, specially kept for sexual purposes, was checked by a nurse. If she turned out to be a virgin, her price increased exponentially, as these women were kept in harems to satisfy the lust of the owners of harems. Even in history, a man was considered rich according to how many women he kept in his harem. The harem did not only belong to the sultans, but also to other people of elite societies. In most cases, the consent of these white slaves was not even given importance, and they would be indulged in such acts without their agreement. As people noticed that white female slaves were capable of getting their customers aroused, they were mostly sold to wealthy people who were willing to spend lavishly on these women. While the black-skinned women were mostly confined to inferior tasks and working in the fields, clothed in rags and bound with chains, white slaves were considered real valuables like gold and treasure to their owners, so they were taken care of and were found well-dressed and perfumed. Slavery has been a dark past in human history and is unacceptable in all forms. Regardless, white slaves in the Ottoman Empire were treated and kept in a much better condition than in other societies where people, especially white ones, were enslaved. But what exactly did their daily life look like? Daily life. A day in the life of a white female slave in the Ottoman Empire meant working in the homes of the rich and elite, tending to their chores and looking after them. The female slaves were responsible for cooking, cleaning, washing, and even taking care of the children of the sultans. Moreover, many female slaves were even appointed to the harem of the sultan. In the harem, they were taught how to please the rich nobles of the Ottoman Empire, as well as ways to make themselves more appealing. The slaves were even subjected to sex work during the sultan's parties in order to entertain guests. Aside from that, they were given dance lessons, so that whenever parties and events were hosted in the empire, they could perform and keep the audience entertained. The economy of the Ottoman Empire was directly related to the ownership of slaves. Considering the fact that the empire as a whole was quite vast, there were numerous tasks that needed to be done to keep the economy flowing smoothly. Who were these tasks appointed to, you may be wondering? The male slaves. A typical day in the life of a male slave meant that he would wake up at dawn and travel vast amounts of distances to the farmlands and start tending to livestock. The Ottoman Empire was known for its crops. Therefore, the slaves were also responsible for harvesting and planting various crops in the fields. This meant long hours in harsh weather for them. Aside from clearing the lands, the white male slaves were also expected to dig ditches, haul wood, hunt for the rich and elite, and more. But luckily for them, they could be freed of these tasks. The future for slaves. A good-looking slave in the Ottoman Empire had the scope and hope to have a high socio-economic status in the future. The good-looking males had the chance to become the at-house caretaker of their master. Similarly, a good-looking girl was mostly kept for the chores and would serve her master and mistress as a waitress or assist her mistress. The white women would automatically get legal and higher status after giving birth to the child of her owner. If her owner did not free her, she would be freed after her owner died. And if she had given birth to a child, that child would have been raised as a legal citizen and the offspring of the master. Therefore, one way to get freed the female slaves was to bear the child of their master, which is permissible according to the Sharia. However, the chances of getting free were relatively low, as the master would not admit such things. Despite this, slavery was not permanent for women, as they were supposed to serve for a few years only. White women were required to serve as slaves for 9 years. On the other hand, black women brought from Africa were compelled to serve only 7 years, as they were not a good fit for the colder climate in the Ottoman Empire. A woman would get a legal certificate after being freed from slavery, and after that, she could request to stay with the family she served or ask to get married. When she got married, she was given a wedding dress, jewelry, house furnishings, and even a house by her foster masters. Usually, slaves kept strong ties with their foster families and received an allowance throughout their lives. Such women mostly married men of high positions after being freed. In consequence, slavery was not seen as something disrespectful. Rather, it was seen as a ladder to move to elite positions. For this reason, many young white women who belonged to poor families offered to become slaves themselves in order to explore better opportunities to become a part of the higher social class. Many white families related to the lower social class also sold their women because the Ottoman army would most probably capture them in some invasion. Therefore, it was better to sell them for some profit to the slave dealers. Western societies boycotted slavery in the 19th century. This evolution also made the Ottoman Empire forbid and cease the white slave trade. But it was a difficult subject, as slavery was deeply rooted in the laws and culture of the Ottoman Empire. It was difficult for the new law and policymakers to make laws about slavery. White people were sold like goods in the market openly, and they were kept for household work, gifted to other people, or kept as concubines in rich households. Eventually, the market was closed by the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. Like and subscribe if you love history as much as we do.